Commander is uniquely demanding compared to other formats when it comes to winning the game. You have multiple opponents to defeat and need to chew through 40 life per opponent. There are plenty of answers to this problem, ranging from combos to combat and everything in between. Today in specific, we'll be looking at a few cards most known for winning games in Commander. This is less so about going over specific combos and more looking at some of the cards most often used to win via those combos or other methods for all levels of play in the format. From important combo outlets to powerful combo haymakers, the one thing that everything on this list will have in common is that if left unchecked, can and often will win the game the turn they resolve. And starting off at number 10, we have Necrotic Ooze. This ooze costs 2 generic and 2 black mana and has 4 power and 3 toughness. As long as it's on the battlefield, it has the activated abilities of all creature cards in all graveyards. While far from the most efficient way to win with your graveyard in a game of Commander, Necrotic Ooze is certainly one of the most versatile. Since Necrotic Ooze gains all creatures' activated abilities in all graveyards, you're able to stack abilities onto one another that were never meant to go together. One of the most classic examples of this is combining 2 6-cost artifact creatures that are not great cards on their own. Phyrexian Devour lets you exile the top card of your library to put X +1/+1 counters onto it, where X is the exiled card's mana value. But you have to sacrifice Phyrexian Devour when its power is 7 or greater. Triskelion can remove a counter from itself to deal 1 damage to any target. With both in the grave, Necrotic Ooze will inherit both the ability to add and remove counters and effectively turn your library into a machine gun. And this is just one of the countless ways to abuse Necrotic Ooze. Since Asmodeus the Archfiend's rather powerful 3 mana draw 7 does not have a downside when Necrotic Ooze is stealing just the activated ability and not the rest of Asmodeus' effects. Beyond how powerful refilling your hand is, you can use this alongside Scourge Familiar and its ability to discard a card to add 1 black mana to draw through your entire deck. Almost any combo that relies on activated creature abilities can be facilitated via Necrotic Ooze and just a bit of setup. Of course, these sorts of combos are particularly weak to graveyard hate, but at the very least, Necrotic Ooze is flexible enough that a deck using it to win will have several combos available to them. This can lead to a situation where players burn through their grave hate only for you to set up a different combo for Necrotic Ooze to win off of. It's this low on the list because while it is certainly popular, it's also one of the cards on here that needs the most prior setup and is one of the most easily disrupted. Plus, it's worth noting that in recent times there have been cards that lessen its uniqueness. You could argue Agatha's Soul Cauldron could take this spot on this list, but it requires a bit more setup than Necrotic Ooze to actually win the game, and has had less time to become established in the format. One could consider both cards co-entries on this list, however, since they are quite similar. And coming in at number 9, we have Approach of the Second Sun. This sorcery costs 6 generic and 1 white mana. The first time you cast Approach from the Second Sun, you gain 7 life and put Approach 7th from the top on your library. Then, if you cast Approach of the Second Sun for a second time in the game, and it was cast from your hand, you win the game on the spot. This sorcery has a high mana value and is extremely telegraphed as far as win conditions go, and as such is entirely a card for more casual metas. That said, Approach from the Second Sun is a somewhat unique win condition in that it is a card that does just win the game on its own as soon as it resolves. As such, counterspells are the only real way to combat Approach from the Second Sun once it's on the stack. The biggest downside beyond its mana value comes from the fact that it buries itself 7 cards deep into your deck. This makes it far too slow for most decks to take advantage of, since all your opponents will have several turns to take you down before you redraw into Approach. However, if your commander is one that allows you to draw a lot of cards, the card becomes a lot more reasonable. Of course, you'll still be focused down even if you draw the card fairly fast, since Approach very blatantly tells the whole pod, I am trying to win the game as soon as possible. That's why decks that make use of the card also tend to rely heavily on cards that insulate them from oncoming aggression. All of this combined leads to Approach finding its most natural home in control or group hug strategies that wish to play a long game centered around card advantage and board control. These decks, such as Kanios and Tiro Meletis, often lack the density of aggressive cards to win via combat, or other more traditional means. In many cases, an infinite combo will be a much more efficient and effective way of winning games like this, but at the casual level, there's some solid consideration for something such as Approach instead. Combo pieces can fill your deck with cards that only really have value when you're winning and are dead for the rest of the game, and are susceptible to removal before you go off or even mid-combo. In a casual meta, you're more likely to see decks with Beast Within effects than you are to sit down against decks packed to the brim with counter magic. As such, approach the Second Sun's niche as a casual game ender for slower decks is fairly solid in a world where combos are less frequent and removal more abundant. And at number 8, we have Torment of Hailfire. This sorcery costs X generic mana and 2 black and makes each opponent lose 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. This process repeats X times, meaning if you cast it with X equaling 3, every opponent would have to make this choice 3 times. At surface level, a card that gives your opponent this much choice isn't ideal, since they can always choose to get rid of whatever they can afford to lose the most. The high starting life totals and prevalence of life gain in the format means many decks can, in theory, afford to give up a chunk of life before working on sacrificing their tokens or other less important permanents. All of this is true, however, there's a point where the value of X gets so high it'll just kill your opponents outright. None of the choices offered by Torment are particularly appealing, especially once you start running low on any of the resources it's taxing. Thus, even though your opponent gets a choice, they're more often forced to throw away their advantages and put you ahead by default. A sufficiently large Torment of Hailfire will eat through everyone's hands in battlefields, and then limit the options to just losing life until death. Of course, this is fairly costly to do, but there's no denying that after a certain point, this card does become a fireball. And Torment of Hailfire is much more than Fireball and its many cousins, for several reasons. In situations where you're not outright winning, Torment will help you take back board control and take advantage in a way that traditional fireballs really never could. Even the likes of Exsanguinate aren't quite as potent. Although Exsanguinate in particular is close enough, it's worth a nod as basically an honorable mention for this list. But also in Commanders specifically, black is one of the best colors for casting a big X spell like this. Black in Commander is often defined by its powerful mana package built around the likes of Cabal Coffers and other extremely powerful black mana accelerants. Cryptghast and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth provide another potent combo to make all of your lands tap for double mana, and both on their own are still handy for casting a large torment. While the ideal amount of mana for the spell will always be infinite, the sheer ease with which black can leverage a mana advantage cannot be overstated. With an abundance of tutors to find acceleration for the X spell itself, it's no surprise that Torment of Hailfire is one of the most popular win conditions in black decks throughout the format. And at number 7, we have Blood Artist. This vampire costs 1 generic and 1 black mana and has 0 power and 1 toughness. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Blood Artist here serves as the chosen representative for a group of cards that are used somewhat interchangeably, given their ability to drain your opponent of life whenever a creature dies. Other options like Zulaport Cutthroat will sometimes drain more players at once in exchange for working only when your own creatures die or have a higher mana value like Falenrath Noble. Blood Artist is one of the most efficient options and has the upside of triggering when opponents' creatures die, giving the card more value in the early to mid game. While in practice, Zulaport Cutthroat will win faster since it drains all opponents at once, that distinction isn't as relevant when these cards are often used alongside ways of infinitely generating and sacrificing your own creatures. There are countless combos that do this in Magic, be it through broken token generation or cards such as Gravecrawler that can be cast from the graveyard. These sorts of combos often lack a means of ending the game on their own, and thus amount to little more than wasting time by taking repetitive game actions. But any of these loops can represent a win with a Blood Artist effect to drain an opponent every time a creature dies. Certain commanders, such as Yawgmoth, Thran Physician, can even combo directly with Blood Artist effects thanks to their built-in combos. Nests of Scarabs can make a creature token whenever you give something a -1/-1 counter, and Yawgmoth's ability lets you sacrifice creatures to place -1/-1 counters at the cost of paying 1 life. Blood Artist not only makes up the life you pay, but allows you to drain your opponent through this powerful synergy a Yawgmoth deck would already want to run. And that's just one of the countless ways to abuse these Blood Artist effects, as cards like Pitiless Plunderer feeds into loops and rewards you for doing what you'd already want to do. Considering the popularity of life gain and drain decks in these formats, there are countless decks that would run Blood Artist on its own, and then also gain the benefits of having a combo outlet with it. These are fairly telegraphed combos that can be disrupted easily and are mostly relegated to lower power level tables, which is why it only clocks in at 7th on this list. But as we all know, art is subjective, and there are countless Commander players who are dedicated fans of whatever Blood Artist is painting. And at number 6, we have Aetherflux Reservoir. This artifact costs 4 generic mana and gains you 1 life each spell you've cast this turn whenever you cast a spell. This exceptional gain works so that if you start your turn by casting something like Soul Ring, you'll gain 1 life. Then if you follow it with casting another spell, you'll gain 2 life, and so on and so on. This can wind up gaining you a lot of life in the right decks, where you focus on casting a large amount of spells like a Storm deck. What makes this card a proper win condition, however, is its secondary effect, which allows you to pay 50 life to deal 50 damage to any target. This is a very high cost, but against most commander decks effectively says target player loses the game. And given the rate at which the reservoir gains life, once you've gained enough life to remove one opponent, you're likely able to do the same to the others. Sure, this requires you to cast a lot of spells, but there are many commanders out there that aim to do exactly that anyway. For these Storm decks, Aetherflux Reservoir is an effective way to pad your life total as you set up and then eventually clear out the table once you're ready to win. The card is even more powerful when combined with Ballista's Citadel, which lets you cast cards from the top of your library by paying life instead of their mana cost. This means that you'll be able to go through your deck, only limited by when you eventually hit too many lands to continue, and even that can be played around with the right card. Aetherflux Reservoir is one of the more narrow options in the format, only really seen play in one distinct type of deck beyond a few niche commander options who can specifically abuse it, like Sidra Galvanic Genius giving it lifelink. Yet despite this narrowness, it is a rather effective option for decks that aim to storm off. However, the fact that it really only belongs in these sort of decks and isn't more easily splashable into other strategies limits it from being any higher on this list. And at number 5, we have Purphoros, God of the Forge. This legendary enchantment creature is a god that costs 3 generic and 1 red mana, and has 6 power and 5 toughness. Purphoros has the keyword indestructible, which means it cannot be destroyed by any effects or killed in combat. As long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Purphoros is not a creature. Devotion is the total of red pips in the mana cost of permanents you control, meaning until you have 4 more red pips on field, he is just an enchantment. Whenever a creature enters under your control, Purphoros deals 2 damage to each opponent. You can also pay 2 generic mana and 1 red mana to give all creatures you control +1 power until end of turn. Although this is more of a rare bonus compared to its triggered ability. Purphoros and cards with similar abilities like Impact Tremors are basically the inverse to the previous entry. While Blood Artist lets you win off of infinite creatures dying, Purphoros provides a win condition for combos that involve a creature entering the battlefield infinitely. Not only does this mean most of the Blood Artist combos that involve looping creatures or generating infinite tokens also win the game with Purphoros, since those combos involve creatures entering and leaving the battlefield infinitely. But Purphoros applies to even more combos beyond this, since Blood Artist can't provide a win through any combo that doesn't involve death. Combos like Dual Caster Mage, infinitely making copies of itself with Twin Flame, make use of Purphoros' strengths, and allows you to win without needing these tokens to make in combat. The reason Purphoros both ranks higher than Blood Artist and takes a spot on this list over other similar cards is that it's one of the harder combo pieces to interact with in the format. Indestructible enchantments blank some of the most popular removal in Commander. And if you carefully manage your devotion, you can keep it from becoming a creature and protect it from Swords to Plowshare, since exile is the only consistent effective way of removing it. Purphoros is a straightforward card that lets you chip down your opponents in the early game, and suddenly will kill them with a burst of creatures or a combo in the late game. While the shocks it doles out will be easy to ignore in the early game, by the late game, Purphoros will represent a clock that drastically pressures your opponents and puts them uncomfortably close to lethal. And at number 4, we have Craterhoof Behemoth. This beast costs 5 generic and 3 green mana, and has 5 power and toughness. It has haste, which means it can attack without summoning sickness, and whenever it enters, creatures you control gain +X power and toughness until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Craterhoof Behemoth also gives all of your creatures trample until end of turn, meaning any excess damage they deal in combat after being blocked is dealt to the defender. This all comes together to make Craterhoof Behemoth the ultimate overrun effect in Commander. Even the most unassuming board of mana dorks and tokens can become threatening very fast when Craterhoof is on the field. Something like a tiny Birds of Paradise can swing for 10+ damage in the air on its own, and that's just one of the many massive creatures you have to swing with. While only really an option in casual Commander, it's one of the most popular ways for a creature-focused strategy to push through lethal damage. You're able to reanimate it in countless other ways to cheat it out, and even hard casting it for 8 mana into an established board state is often worth it. Trample ensures if your opponent tries to block their way through it all, then they're going to have to throw away most, if not all, their entire board in the process. The only real effective answers to Craterhoof beyond countering it are instant speed mass removal or ways to take yourself out of the game temporarily. While it lacks the certainty that combo outlets often have when going for the win, Craterhoof is a mainstay of Commander regardless. As long as you're a deck that runs a high density of creatures and has green available, it's usually a safe and potent inclusion at most power levels of the game. It's such a potent card that we've even seen variations on it, such as the white Moonshaker Cavalry, which trades out Trample for flying and lacks haste. If this were a list based solely on the card's power and implications, then perhaps Craterhoof would be even lower. But its spot as a staple of casual play makes it, by definition, one of the most popular and common win conditions in the format, and worthy of its location here on the list. And at number 3, we have Protean Hulk. This beast costs 5 generic and 2 green mana and has 6 power and toughness. When it dies, you search your library for any number of creature cards with a total mana value of 6 or less. Put them all into the battlefield, then shuffle. Protean Hulk's ability may not directly deal damage or win you the game itself, but in practice it represents several almost instant wins if left unchecked. This is because Protean Hulk can search up several creature-based infinite combos on its own. Being able to grab 6 mana value of creatures means you're able to start by grabbing a reanimation effect like Phyrexian Delver, plus some 1 mana sack outlets. Then with Delver's entire trigger, you revive Protean Hulk and sacrifice it to your sack outlet, and get another search from Protean Hulk. This can grab more reanimations to continue the chain, or just kill the opponent with a compact creature combo like Melira's Sylvic Outcast and a persistent creature like Murderous Redcap. Protean Hulk is such a powerful card, it was even once banned in the format, until it was suddenly unbanned in 2017. Upon being unbanned, it became one of the most potent threats in competitive Commander thanks to its synergy with the card Flash. For just 1 generic and 1 blue mana, you could play any creature from your hand at instant speed, but you'd have to instantly sacrifice it if you did not then pay most of its mana cost when it enters. In the case of Protean Hulk, which has one of the most powerful death triggers ever printed, you actively wanted Flash to force you to sacrifice your Hulk. This essentially gave you a 2 mana instant speed win condition that could flex into different combos based on what would do the best at the moment. This interaction was so powerful in competitive Commander that Flash was eventually banned in the format. This curbed Protean Hulk's ubiquity in competitive Commander, although it remains a potent option in more casual decks to this day. And at number 2, we have Walking Ballista. This artifact creature is a construct which costs XX mana and has 0 power and toughness, but enters with X+1/+1 counters on it. This means if you pay 10 mana total on Walking Ballista, X would equal 5 and your Ballista would enter with 5 counters. You may pay 4 generic mana to put a +1/+1 counter on Walking Ballista, and at instant speed, you may remove a +1/+1 counter from it to deal 1 damage to any target. This construct is a potent combo card in multiple formats, thanks to its synergy with Heliod's Uncrowned. Heliod can both give a creature lifelink and has a triggered ability to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature whenever you gain life. Once you give Walking Ballista lifelink, you'll be able to ping an opponent for 1 and then instantly gain 1 life, which puts another counter onto the Ballista. From there, if there's no interaction, you're able to simply machine gun the table with pings and gain infinite life in the process just to rub it in. But this is just the most compact and potent win condition that Walking Ballista is a part of. There are several other cards that combo with it by manipulating counter placement in a way that you can have a replenishment source of pings. If this was all there was, the card would have still made the list, albeit probably at a lower spot. But Walking Ballista also functions in a way similar to Torment of Hailfire, where it wins the game if you have infinite mana. Since there's no upper cap to how much you can pay when casting Walking Ballista, you can cast it with X equaling some arbitrarily high value and win on the spot. While there are ways to interact with this, it can be hard to do since the player with Walking Ballista can simply just respond to the removal spell by removing more counters. You have to time your removal for when Ballista doesn't have any extra counters to spare, and in many cases, that opportunity just won't come up before the game is over. Plus, the card is colorless, so it can fit into literally any Commander deck without any color restriction at all, which is just a cherry on top of an already fantastic win condition. And finally, the number 1 win condition Commander is perhaps unsurprisingly Thassa's Oracle. This Merfolk Wizard costs 2 blue mana and has 1 power and 3 toughness. When it enters, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your devotion to blue. Put 1 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If X is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your library, you win the game. Thassa's Oracle is a card we've discussed plenty on this channel already, yet is so clearly the right choice for the top spot that it warrants some further conversation. Before Thassa's Oracle was even printed, we already had Laboratory Maniac, a far weaker card which lets you win the game instead of losing the game whenever you attempted to draw a card from an empty library. This card was a rather popular card in Commander given the sheer quantity of ways of emptying one's deck. Thassa's Oracle provides a very similar effect, although it gives you wiggle room of not even needing to fully empty your deck. Just have it mostly empty. More backbreaking though is the fact that it wins the game on a trigger when it enters, meaning that spot removal does nothing to stop it from winning the game. You need to counter it or the triggered ability, or else it will just win no matter what kind of removal you might be packing. It has become far and away the best outlet for winning in competitive Commander, especially after the banning of Dockside Extortionists. It's by far one of the most polarizing cards in the entire format, and the clear pick for the most powerful win condition in the Commander format. We could discuss it in further detail, but in the case of Thassa's Oracle, it really does feel like beating a dead horse. An already strong effect was pushed into an even stronger card, and now warps Commander to this very day. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any other Commander win cons you think we may have missed, or have ideas you'd like to see for future videos? If so, let us know down in the comments below.